On the 25th of January, 1944, amid the relentless grip of a Ukrainian winter where temperatures plunged to minus 30 degrees Celsius and the ground lay frozen like iron under a pall of swirling snow, the 198th Infantry Division, our weary Württemberg-Baden formation, forged in 1939 and bloodied from Barbarossa's thunder to the Dnieper's bends, assumed a precarious defensive stance facing westward, not eastward as tactical orthodoxy might dictate amid the swirling Soviet offensives. Their ranks, savagely winnowed by the Kirovograd offensive's maelstrom earlier that month, stretched taut across more than 25 kilometers of wind-scoured steppe, a fragile cordon of frost-rimmed foxholes and skeletal wire entanglements against the gathering storm of the 1st Ukrainian Front's probing divisions. Our Grenadier Regiment 308 inherited the southernmost flank, a sprawling 10-kilometer expanse of snow-swept fields dotted with stunted birches and crater-pocked meadows, tenuously linked to the neighboring 34th Infantry Division's lines to the south, where our outposts abutted theirs in a hasty patchwork of frozen earth, splintered timbers, and rusted barbed wire that sang in the gale like distant shrapnel. We anchored the northwest rim of Votilivka, that beleaguered crossroads hamlet of timber hovels with iced-over wells and sagging onion-dome barns, a tactical linchpin in the Dnieper salient, and the exposed flanks beyond, open terrain with a howling wind carried the faint, ominous rumble of distant Katyushas, offering no natural bulwarks, save scattered copses that provided scant cover for our machine gun nests. As Grasser meticulously chronicled in his divisional ledger, the 198th perched at the northwest apex of our protruding salient, the very fulcrum from which, per bitter lessons etched in the snows of Smolensk in 1941 and the mud of Kharkov the prior spring, a red army pincer would launch to seal the dreaded encirclement, trapping us in a steel-jawed cauldron like the one that had devoured the 6th Army at Stalingrad just a year prior. Our lines were gossamer thin, manned by skeletal crews of frost-nipped veterans with frostbitten fingers, fumbling at bolt actions and green replacements, shivering in threadbare greatcoats, devoid of echelons in depth to absorb shocks, bereft of robust reserves to plug inevitable breaches, stripped of dedicated anti-tank batteries, scarce anti-tank guns, and improvised anti-tank weapons, to stem the armored tides of T-34, 85S, and heavy tanks, and lacking prepared fallback redoubts, mere hasty slits, scraped in the permafrost with frozen bayonets, for a phased, elastic withdrawal that might yet salvage the corps that encapsulated our plight, a mission pivotal to the survival of 11th and 62nd Corps amid Army Group South's fraying tapestry, yet our posture as brittle as hoarfrost under a tank's cleat, with rations thinned to black bread and frozen horseflesh, and ammunition hoarded like miser's gold. Late that evening, under a canopy of leaden clouds spitting razor-edge sleet that stung like needles through our wool, I trudged through knee-deep drifts, boots crunching the crystalline crust, breath pluming in futile defiance of the cold, to inspect the 6th Company's position, where Lieutenant Lloyd von Odowitz, a lithe, erudite Austrian officer of 24, with the polished courtesy of a Viennese salon hostess, his field cap tilted jauntily despite the rime crusting his scarf, commanded his 120-odd. Men hunkered in shallow scrapes, they'd clawed from the iron-hard ground amid the undulant meadows, using entrenching tools dulled by frost. Their foxholes, ringed by snow berms piled with frozen clods and twig revetments lashed with bootlaces, exhaled plumes of acrid pipe smoke from communal briars that mingled with the pervasive tang of damp wool, machine oil, and the faint, underlying rot of unburied dead from prior skirmishes. Odowitz, his breath fogging the sub-zero air like a spectral veil, briefed me in hushed tones over a shared mess tin of ersatz coffee, bitter sludge boiled over a bayonet stake fire, on the escalating menace. Brisk Soviet probes at twilight, shadows of NKVD-led penal battalions, flitting like wolves in the gloaming, their submachine guns chattering sporadically to test our nerves. Together, we strained ears toward the front, attuned to the ominous grind of tank treads, likely heavy tanks or upgunned medium tanks churning the adjacent mire, their cleats rasping like millstones over frozen ruts, and faint, guttural voices drifting on the wind, Slavonic curses or barked orders from commissars, unervingly proximate, as if the enemy's picnicked just beyond the wire with samovars and balalaikas. At midnight, I retraced my steps to the battalion command post, a squat peasant hut with walls of wattle and daub-patched with captured red banners. Its massive stove guttering peat bricks that barely warmed the drafty interior. My greatcoat crusted with rime like a glacial shroud. Weeks sans disrobing had left me a walking laundry of sweat, grime, and cordite. So I shed my jackboots, cracked leather protesting, and tunic, breeches heavy with ingrained mud, collapsing onto a palliasse of straw-stuffed sacking infested with lice that marched in silent phalanxes, slumber claiming me like a merciful blackout amid the distant, intermittent cough of sentry flares. At 4:40 a.m. on the 26th, precisely as the first pallid streak of false dawn clawed the eastern horizon, Armageddon erupted with the fury of Zhukov's first Ukrainian front. A cataclysmic barrage hammered Botilivka, not confined to our sliver, but unloosing hell across a 30-kilometer frontage from the 88th Infantry Division seemed northward, the horizon blooming in a staccato of muzzle flares like a false aurora borealis that silhouetted skeletal poplars against the night. The Soviets unleashed hundreds of batteries, 76 millimeters field guns in mass batteries, 152 millimeters howitzers thundering from concealed revetments, and the infamous multiple rocket launchers mounted on trucks, in a symphony of annihilation that shook the earth like the wrath of ancient gods. Shells of every caliber shrieking earthward in interlocking salvos that pulverized the night with high explosive fury. 122 millimeters rockets added their banshee wail, contrails scrawling the vault like fiery script before detonating in geysers of frozen clods, splintered timber, and superheated steam that scalded the air, the ground quaking as if the steppe itself convulsed in agony, sending shockwaves that toppled sentries from their perches and buried forward observers in cascades of debris. The foe lavished special fury on our abutment with the 88th Infantry Division to the north, that vulnerable seam where boundary markers blurred in the chaos of snow and smoke, seeking to sunder the chain with concentrated fire from the 40th Army's artillery groups, exacting a toll in shattered machine guns and pulverized radio sets. It heralded a grand assault on the scale of the Korsun-Cherkasy encirclements prelude, with 3.5 Soviet divisions, perhaps elements of the 5th Guards Tank Army's vanguards, poised to exploit the stunned void. We had mere heartbeats to snatch rifles slick with frost, crumpled tunics, and stick grenades whose porcelain heads threatened to crack in the cold. Tumbling into the slit trench, we'd preemptively excavated rearward, a cramped gash 2 meters deep and barely a meter wide, roofed with stout oak beams scavenged from a ruined barn, overlain by a meter of tamped loess soil, and quilted with a thick layer of straw for camouflage against the probing beams of Soviet searchlights and insulation against the bone-chilling seep. Minutes on, our cottage disintegrated in a frenzy of blasts, high explosive rounds from howitzers crumpling the walls like tinfoil, roof beams exploding in splinters that whickered like hornets, leaving only a smoking foundation amid the maelstrom. Thenceforth we cowered in our burrow, pulses thundering against our ribs like war drums, praying the timbers held as the drum fire raged unabated, a thunderous tattoo of over 100,000 shells per hour that clawed at sanity, the air inside thickening with the stench of sweat, fear, and the cognac's faint anise aftertaste. Just air diving in, my quick aid, ever the opportunist with eyes sharp as a ferret's and hands that snatch shadows, snagged a dusty flask of French cognac looted from a staff car's wrecked the prior fall, post-initial shock, when the world's roar blurred to a tinnitus hum. It circulated hand to hand among the half-dozen souls crammed in the trench, the fiery spirit of fleeting sacrament that numbed nerves and steadied trigger fingers as the ordeal stretched into an eternity of muffled detonations. At 6 a.m. precisely, 80 minutes of unremitting hell that etched lines into young faces like decades of toil. The deluge ceased on a Führer orders cue, plunging the world into sepulchral hush broken only by the settling creak of cooling earth and the distant, wounded moans of the landscape. The sudden void more eerie than the roar as ears rang like fractured bells. Per tactical cannon refined in the meat grinders of Kursk and the Dnieper bends, Red Army shock troops in padded jackets, armed with rifles and satchel charges, would swarm forthwith, exploiting the stunned interregnum to overrun command wires and nestle in our midst. We erupted topside, blinking into the pallid murk laced with acrid powder smoke, and beheld Votilka's utter ruin, save a handful of stubborn relics, like a gutted church steeple and a lone, defiant silo. The hamlet was raised, a charred skeleton of overlapping craters yawning like mass graves 10 meters wide, the scant birches denuded to skeletal husks with bark shredded into confetti, their roots exposed like veins, only stubbed chimneys of fieldstone defying the desolation like accusatory fingers amid the smoldering, ashen waste where embers glowed like hellish eyes, and the air reeked of scorched wood and ionized soil. Mercifully, as dawn's gray light clawed through the haze, revealing the surreal tableau, my battalion, clinging to its sector with about 400 rifles, and the regiment's first, guarding the town's ragged perimeter with machine gun nests sited in ruined cellars and solitary anti-tank rifles, endured minimal attrition, their slits spared the epicenter by the barrages overshoot into the void. But the 6th Company, outlier in the exposed fields with its 120 men strung thin across 2 kilometers, was obliterated in the first waves, per the ragged survivors' tales. Perhaps a dozen ghosts stumbling rearward through the drifts, faces blackened with soot, eyes hollow as sockets, uniforms shredded by blast, the young Odowitz, barely 24 and full of untested fire, and his messenger fell to captivity amid the rout, trussed with their own bootlaces and hauled off in trucks toward some NKVD pens. Their fate a grim lottery of labor camps or worse. Those fugitive lances from a 6th, raw conscripts from Bavaria's farms, their field blouses stained with the blood of comrades, also gasped, voices cracking with shock, that Russian infantry, hordes in fur hats and greatcoats, submachine guns chattering in disciplined bursts, and tanks, sleek medium tanks belching diesel fumes thick as London fog, their guns questing like serpents, had ruptured in droves betwixt Votilka and the 34th Division southeastward, a 5-kilometer gulf where our sentries, lulled by exhaustion, dozed in their holes, or were lines thinned to gossamer amid the wire's tangles. From the town's fringes, only desultory pops echoed, sporadic small-arm snaps from rifles and the occasional crump of a stick grenade, suggesting the enemies, sated on the pyrotechnics lavished on the village by the Guards' Cavalry Corps guns, deemed a sideshow assault profligate, husbanding strength for the main event of the Korsun-Cherkasy encirclement that would snare 56,000 Germans by week's end. From a regimental command post in Repke, 5 kilometers rear, a cluster of barns with corrugated roofs sagging under snow, and a windmill's skeletal arms creaking like a gibbet, our regimental doctor materialized to forge liaison through the chaos. Dr. Stockdorf, unflappable as a surgeon mid-laparotomy, his leather satchel bulging with morphine syrettes, sulfa packets, and field dressings yellowed by use, grinned conspiratorially through his frost-rimmed spectacles and peppered us with prying queries on our grit and the tally of walking wounded. He averred Repke too had absorbed a commensurate pasting, the barrage's footprint mirroring ours. Roofs caved inward like crushed eggshells, livestock pulped into red mist within their stalls. Yet his olive-drab staff car idled with a throaty purr, exhaust coiling like dragon's breath. Briefed on our fog of war, scouts overdue, wires severed. He wheeled about with a salute crisp as fresh snow, vanishing into the murk to apprise the colonel amid the first stirrings of counter-battery fire. Stockdorf epitomized the archetype I'd witnessed across the war's span from the Polish plains to the Volga's ruins. No medic or chaplain derelict in duty's crucible. Our divisional chaplain, a stout Dominican friar in field gray cassock with a crucifix dangling from his belt, plunged unarmed into assault detachments, rosary beads clacking amid the frenzy of close quarters like St. Michael in the melee. Our surgeons oft shone in martial craft, triage under fire with the precision of a watchmaker, tourniquets cinched amid tracers stitching the snow. Our staff surgeon paramount, primed sans fanfare to helm a battalion or regiment in the breach, his steadiness a lodestar for frayed command chains and troopers' fealty alike, earning nods even from the hardest infantrymen. Next, we slogged enemy ward through the churned waste, boots sucking at the slushy craters, the air heavy with the ozone tang of explosives, to the 1st Battalion's command post under Captain Dr. Major, a bespectacled jurist warrior of 35 with a steely mien honed in the 40 campaign, his iron cross dangling like a talisman, perplexed unto exaltation to spy his hut unscathed amid the lunar desolation. its thatch roof intact save for singed eaves, stovepipe belching thin defiance against the pall. We ducked within through a doorframe splintered but standing, finding the commanding officer, his aides in rumpled tunics and messengers, scribes with notebooks frost-rimed, pale as whey but recomposed around a trestle table strewn with maps inked in hasty crayon, mid-staff huddle, dissecting the melee's fragments via runner's whispers. Unlike our frantic burrow diggers, these Sybarites hadn't deigned to excavate slits in the iron soil, weathering the tempest prone on their plank floor amid scattered samovars, swaddled in eiderdown blankets looted from a collective farm. A riddle we mulled later over captured hashish. Their sanctuary a statistical fluke of the barrage scatter pattern. Shells marching wide into the void. Clarity eluded on the town's rim too, fog and acrid smoke veiling probes like a shroud. Scouts reported shadows, but no firm tally. As pieced post-war from division logs and grassers' tomes, the barrage wrought scant havoc there. Shells overshot into fallow fields or duds in the freeze. But equines and wagons in the streets were totaled in the secondary blasts. Carcasses of requisitioned draft horses steaming in the snow like sacrificial altars. Harnesses tangled like macabre vines amid spilled fodder and shattered crates of ammunition rounds. Per grasser, sundry battalions and companies, perhaps 800 men in all across the 198th's southern face, clung to strong points like ruined rail halts and basement redoubts, thwarting red assaults in midday Donnerbrooks, where bayonets clashed in 10-degree melee and stick grenades arced like comets, the air thick with a coppery reek of blood and propellant. Yet Ivan's armor, shrouded in ground mist like wraiths from the taiga, breached the frail interstices twixt hamlets with the First Guard's cavalry mechanized group spearheads, knifing unhindered to the gun line where divisional howitzers spiked trails in futile panic, their crews abandoning pieces to the frost as medium tanks brewed the first in oily pyres that lit the snow like bonfires. Votilvka held by a thread. 1st and 2nd Battalions of Regiment 308 immersed in visceral brawls. House clearing with flamethrowers that painted interiors orange, satchel charges blooming in embrasures to silence nested anti-tank guns, while Regiment 308 staff, hunkered in Repke cellars with the 7th, 8th, and 10th batteries of Artillery Regiment 235. Divisional howitzers barking from hasty pits ringed by trembling spotters, stemmed a tank thrust with anti-tank gun rounds that punched through. Glassy at 500 meters. Hulls erupting in secondary blasts that hurled turrets skyward like macabre discuses. Candidly, the Soviets could have palmed Votilvka by luncheon had they committed their full weight. 3 divisions of the 26th Army's foot sloggers with tank support. But prudence prevailed under the commander's eye. They spurned the bauble, foreseeing its tumble sand strife as the pocket tightened, conserving for the envelopment that would birth the Korsun-Cherkasy cauldron. A 1,200 square kilometer trap devouring 6 German divisions by January 28th. Thus, by the 28th, these tempests, part of the broader Dnieper-Carpathian offensive's winterhammer, forged the noose round 11th and 62nd Corps in the Cherkasy Pocket, a frozen hell of 56,000 Germans, snow-cloaked and starving on 200 grams of bread daily, their lines contracting under the 2nd Ukrainian Front's vice. The 88th, our erstwhile rightward kin, their Hanoverian ranks thinned to 4,000 rifles, recoiled north toward the Niloy-Tikich River's icy folds. We of the 198th South-Southeast into ravines choked with abandoned guns, birthing a yawning rent midmost, where Soviet scouts already infiltrated under white smocks. To parry this mortal thrust, we pivoted nigh 180 degrees in a night of frantic realignment. Sappers bridging ravines with felled trees, runners gasping orders through blizzards, fronts realigning eastward twixt Rzhivchovo's rail yards and Vinogradovka's mud-slick crossroads. Grenadier Regiment 308 shouldering the divisional right. Flank guard in birch groves laced with tripwires and ravines that funneled attackers into kill zones. This southward skid unfolded 26 to 27 January's witching hour, bucking myriad red echelons. Siberian rifle divisions, with penal battalions flogged forward by commissars, in rearguard melees where flares popped like crimson fireflies against the void, shadows lunging from the drifts, with bayonets fixed and battle cries tearing the night. Our machine guns stitching the snow in 1,200 rounds per minute until barrels glowed cherry red. Only on February 11th, after weeks of futile staving against the Neußes Inch, where Luftwaffe transports dropped meager bread sacks amid anti-aircraft fire's lacework, launched the sanguinary lunge to succor the pocket, Manstein's desperate bid to pry the jaws with 3rd Panzer Corps' 200 surviving tanks, a spear of medium tanks and heavy tank destroyers probing the 40-kilometer gauntlet. Our Grenadier 308, buttressed by this ironclad phalanx, turrets questing under commanders' binoculars, advanced post a 15-minute orchestral prelude that scarred the earth, divisional artillery's iron hail from heavy howitzers in massed batteries, multiple rocket launchers shrieking witches, 6-barreled mortars vomiting rockets in rippling salvos that scythed wheat fields like divine reapers, and dive bomber squadrons of 8th Air Corps keening dives, their sirens wailing as 500 kilograms bombs cratered. Foe lines near Uman'ka, the blasts hurling Soviet sappers skyward in geysers of black soil. We surged forward in echelon, netting Uman'ka in a welter of close-quarters savagery. Trenches choked with padded jackets and discarded submachine guns amid the stench of ruptured bowels, pressing to Yablanovka's lip, that mud-slicked knot of huts clustered around a shattered windmill, where our pioneers bridged a stream with assault boats under desultory mortar fire. A Vinogradovka crisis. Soviet counterthrusts from the 27th Army buckling our sisters, yanked us pivotward, relieving Sister Regiment 326, veterans who'd pierced thither with 300 rifles, now tasked Vinogradovka's maw amid house-to-house infernos. We slotted in seamlessly, their footsore ranks shuffling past under fitful moonlight pierced by signal pistol star shells, handshakes grim amid the reek of phosphorus. 11 to 12 February's gloaming bore edict from Divisional Operations Officer, crackling over severed wires, thrust beyond Yablanovka to Tikhonovka, a hamlet of 500 souls reduced to rubble, avenging an afternoon Soviet raid by the 5th Guards Tank Army that mulched a Panzer Division's lifeline, trucks gutted by gunfire, fuel drums erupting in pillars of black smoke that beaconed the steppe. My 1st Battalion peer, Captain von der Leyen, a Rhinelander with a Dulles scar, and I concurred over a map lit by a single candle. Our wraiths, gone from rations of frozen turnips and ersatz coffee, boots rotted to rags, couldn't hack the nocturnal slog in gumbo-deep slop churned by track columns, where footing betrayed like quicksand and compasses spun wild in the magnetic storms of artillery. Prophetic qualms, etched in the faces of men whose eyes held the hollow stare of the doomed, regimental and divisional brass, adamant under Manstein shadow, sweetened the bitter pill with copious panzer largesse. 3 dozen hulking beasts from the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard, Essels throbbing like hearts in the cold, their long guns promising requital. For us, Tikhonovka redixed a midnight foray in Italy's Apennines. We nursed the tanks through quagmire and Stygian pall, headlamps doused, only emerald-lensed torches bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps to guide the behemoths, mustering ere the hamlet in a skirmish line of Panzer Grenadiers dismounted from half-tracks. Medium tanks prelude the symphony, Koch's machine guns hosing facades in disciplined bursts, tracers kindling thatch roofs in roaring infernos that limned the skyline like a medieval siege, silhouettes of onion domes stark against the pyre. As long guns intoned, crack boom echoing like thunderclaps, ripping Ivan's bowels with hypervelocity rounds that punched through bunkers like hot knives, medium tanks erupting in secondary blasts of ammunition cook-offs that lit the night orange. The Reds reeled, stupefied by the sudden apocalypse. Our assault surged, bayonets fixed on rifles, shouts raw as torn cloth amid the whoosh of Molotovs, into the conflagration's maw. Resistance crumbled to desultory potshots from garret windows, prisoners piling like cordwood in the village square, hundreds of disheveled Soviets in greatcoats, hands zip-tied with bootlaces, their commissars dispatched with pistols at dawn. Casualties? Nil, nigh miraculous. Dawn's blush found us masters, the hamlet a smoldering charnel, the night a velvet cloak for our audacity. Diurnal execution would have invited ground attack aircraft's vengeful dives from the 17th Air Army, their cannon shredding columns like wheat. 3rd Panzer Corps, bolstered by Das Reich and Leibstandard, clawed forward 30 kilometers through minefields and anti-tank ditches, lapping to within 13 kilometers of linkage on the Lysianko-Alexandrov-Kachyshin General Trace, where relief probes brushed the pocket's outer wire. But Elon ebbed inexorably, treadheads bogging axle deep in the morass, fuel siphoned by partisans, and Soviet reserves. Fresh mechanized corps from the steppe front, counter-punching with heavy tanks that brood. Medium tanks at standoff ranges. Thus, 16 to 17 February's midnight, under a moonless vault heavy with the promise of more snow. The pocketed corps, now 45,000 ragged souls under General Stemmerman, ordained a desperate breakout toward Uman'ka, executed in Torment's Forge, sloughing 30,000 casualties in a gauntlet of minefields and ambushes, abandoning artillery parks wholesale and 200 tanks to the ice. A twilight of the gods of torches flaring against the drifts and tracers, stitching the exodus like accusatory fingers, survivors. Clawing through the Niloy Tikach's frigid torrent on improvised rafts of frozen corpses. Behind our picket veil reformed in the lee of shattered pines, Führer's fatuous halt order, freezing two corps to the Dnieper's bluffs like flies in amber, catalyzed the Cherkasy calamity, irrecoverable despite Pyrrhic sallies that cost another 10,000 before the noose snapped shut. Unthinkable the toll in flesh and steel from obdurate fortresses in Stalingrad's rubble heaps, where Paulus's host had withered to 91,000 phantoms. Symmetrically, Reds might have spared their 41 hemorrhages, over 1 million at Kiev and Vyazma, by elastic fades into Mother Russia's vasty bosom, trading space for the Wehrmacht's overextension, by 42 at Moscow's gates and 43 at Kursk salient. They master it, elastic as steppe grass bending before the gale. We'd squandered our verve. The Panzers sprint now a hobble. Manstein's retrograde riposts, thunderbolts mid-feint, like the third Kharkov miracle. Now phantoms of 43, our muscle atrophied for such legerdemain. Reserves bled, white, by endless attrit. Though Cherkasy's maw gulped not all, some 30,000 clawed free, gaunt as concentration camp inmates. The March 5th reprise assailed our division a la Votilvka, the Uman'ka offensive's hammer unloosing another barrage anvil, then hammer across the 8th Army's front. Soviet divisions from the 2nd Ukrainian front surging like locusts. We recoiled to 41's NATO crease, the old Stalin line remnants of concrete pillboxes cracked by 3 winters. My battalion slotted in Kamenkagori's ravine-laced heights, repulsing tank infantry lunges for days on end. Anti-tank guns spiking heavy tank hulls at 800 meters with tungsten core rounds that ricocheted like thunder. Infantry's belt-fed belts from machine guns chewing red waves into red snow until barrels swapped in frantic relays. Till dawn 5th, enemies, wise to our no-bypass. Stratagems from prior cauldrons, scorned flanking hamlets wholesale, enveloping with the 6th Tank Army's 500 medium tanks, in a steel tide that outflanked our anchors. Barrage sush, abrupt as a guillotine, heralded the swarm. Soviets slithered south in echelons, flanking my command post. Huts squat amid orchards black, skeletal boughs heavy with hoarfrost, their scouts in white, capes ghosting the wire. We hugged the massive hearth, its embers casting flickering shadows on walls papered with faded icons. Adjutant, First Lieutenant Klaus, a Saxon with a poet's lilt, querying in a whisper hoarse from cordite, "Sir, what now amid this noose?" The high command, nay, the leader in his bunker, quivers in glee at our victory. I quipped, "Gallows with our fragile carapace against despair, a flicker of the gallows humor that bound us like mortar." In fog's cowl, unnatural banks rolling like smoke from a samovar, and cordite's choking veil that burned the lungs, we exfiltrated stepwise consonant with probes, sappers mining trails behind. The division's phantoms, now 5,000 rifles in name only, parried diurnal thrusts with threadbare sinews, nocturnal leaps to next crease under covering multiple rocket launcher barrages that side the pursuers. Culminating March 9th nigh Uman, that vital rail nexus of granaries bulging with looted wheat, sidings choked with gutted boxcars. We savored the denouement's bitter aftertaste, the 40th Army's vanguards already lapping our heels. By then, enemies severed regiments from divisional nerve with deep penetrations. Commanding officer radioed fealty to Colonel Kaiser of Regiment 326, our battle group's keel, a Prussian martinet with a monocle and a penchant for Schiller, mid a crackle of static. My arrival for parley, trudging a mile through shell-slashed orchards, coincided with an urgent flash. 40 red tanks, heavy tanks of the 5th Guards Tank Corps, on Novoarkhangelsk Highway. Attention all posts. Kaisers riposte, deadpan over the ether. Attention? Shall we salute as they rumble in? Heels clicked. His laconic barbs and iron nerve, forged in France 40. Legion among the old guard. Verdict. Nocturnal bolt southward toward the bug's distant gleam, exploiting the tank-only cordon. Scarce footsloggers from the 27th Army. Their infantry lagged by mud. Easing infill twixt behemoths over the denser web of dug-in lines laced with mines and trip flares. Anti-meridium, prescient amid the gathering storm, I tasked a reconnaissance patrol. 6 veterans in white smocks, carbines slung, to scout the Uman'ka ford, that minnow stream gurgling twixt alder thickets and willow whips heavy with rime. Patrol Chief Sergeant Meyer, a Bavarian poacher's son with hawk eyes, avowed via runner. Embankment athwart viable, toy span of planks intact, depths knee-shallow even in spate. Vespertine, as the sun bled crimson over the horizon, calamity unfolded. Tank swarms assailed direct, over 50 heavy tanks in wedge, guns barking like hounds, unanswerable sans counterpunch, our lone assault gun sidelined by a thrown track. I ordain battalion splinter. Withdraw piecemeal o'er Uman'ka in fire teams. Reform in southwest bosque of oaks, whose branches clawed the sky like supplicants. Solitary stance impossible, footing a lethal jest. Tanks cresting the rise spelled minuets for all, their spotters' binoculars glinting like vulture eyes. I waded hip-deep first, the chill striking like a bayonet to the groin, mandating human chain grip. Every alternate clasping forebears mitt in a living bulwark, spaced a meter to foil the hydraulic ram of the upstream surge. Peacetime engineer lore from the Weezer exercises in 39, a breakwater of flesh against the Volga's kin. Conjuring Ahab's thunder from some reservoir of frayed command, I quelled panic's froth, lads blanching at the spate's maw, visions of drowning in ice churn amid the screams of the current, mothers' faces flashing in their terror, roaring orders that echoed hollow over the roar. Susie, my dappled mare, mane like burnished chestnut, flanks scarred from a Kursk splinter, joined the fray unbidden. One flail-swept soul, a Silesian conscript named Kowalski, yanked streamward by the undertow, vanishing in a white water gasp. I spurred her plunge, water sheeting from her withers, bellowing tailhold, damn it. Hooves churning froth like paddles, she hauled him gasping to shallows. His fingers locked in her sodden tail like a lifeline from Valhalla. Wagons fared ill in the melee. One vortexed wholesale, plunging with its bandaged cargo. 24 walking wounded lashed to benches, moans silenced in the bubble. No quarter in the abyss. Another yawed under the gale, snagged under the span downstream amid splintered timbers, traces taut as bowstrings. Equines thrashing in frenzy, nostrils flaring wide for air, eyes rolling white. Mercy's bullet for my pistol, heartsick and powder-burn hot, pierced their noble brows, sparing prolonged thrash-in. The mill, a Stygian baptism that etched the nadir of my ledger, the river running red with equine blood under the indifferent stars. South Bank safe at last, sodden and shuddering, I tasked senior commanding officer, Captain Becker, a hamburger with a sailor's squint, to herd the survivors in the wood, bide as briefed in silent position. With Susie, her flanks steaming like a forge, I ferried non-combatants, including a pair of medics, satchels sodden with bandages and iodine vials. Across the ford's remnants, air joining the treeline. Thence, outrage scorched my veins. The battalion bolted daylight across the bald. Contra my Fiat etched in the snow, courting medium tank spite from hull-down positions. Dispersed in the fusillade, mulched by Koch's machine guns that stitched the earth. Remnants, perhaps 150 shadows, slurped piecemeal by kin units in the rout. No reprisal pursued. Futile as baying at the moon. Deed done. No balm for the lost. Later 44, that captain, Swabia's stoic son, with a wife in Stuttgart baking non-existent strudel, gut shot in a Vosges thrust amid autumn leaves, expired in Ulm's hospital, fever claiming what shrapnel spared. Uman'ka's surge? Enigma unsolved, breached dam upstream by red sappers or our own engineers to balk pursuit, the Prutzkin swollen by spring's whisper, indeterminate in the fog of war, a tactical ghost. A handful synced with me, 8 lances, rifles clutched like crutches. We lurked for crepuscule in the bosque's embrace. Twixt copse and sisterwood, 500-meter bald of stubble fields inclining from streambed like a ramp to Golgotha. rimmed by medium tank sentinels, whose diesels muttered like idling fates. Diurnal dash a charnel lottery under their gun gaze. Motion taboo, less spotlit by a biplane's roving eye. Indelible torment clawed the soul. Staccato pleas from mangled across the water, guttural help. Comrades, in fractured German, laced with Silesian dialect. Unanswerable lest the galleries, fusillade from Soviet machine guns, turn our cover to sieve. Agony compounded as dusk deepened. Tanks with foot clingers, Siberian riders in padded jackets, submachine guns slung, motor to the whales, medevac amok of bayonets and pistol shots. Our impotence a rack that twisted worse than typhus. Dusk's mantle descended like absolution. Egress in single file, my edict a litany. Ignore hail. Press silent as graves or die trying. Susie bridled for, her breath a warm nimbus in the chill. Initial void, save the Uman'ka's sullen gurgle. Verge ward. First Slav challenge rasped from a thicket. Stop. Who goes? We ghosts held breath. Second, fiercer, with a burst that shredded leaves. Surrender. Our phalanx erupted in blind hose from rifles and submachine guns into the gloam, muzzle flashes blooming like fireflies, shadows scattering like roaches in panic. Breakthrough pristine, no loss to our 8. Susie unscathed in her vigil, her prior salvation redux weeks prior. A mirage march to Germans across a drift, snow-camouflaged phalanx of the 112th Rifle Division, eyed rain sharp. Lead slug from a rifle whined earward at 150 meters. Hot as betrayal. Susie wheeled sans cue, intuition's bolt carrying us to a snowbank's lee as the volley whined harmless overhead, her flanks heaving like bellows. Post-fray an hour's thorn scrub trudge, branches lashing faces like whips, the undergrowth a tangle of briars that snagged tunics, debauched to forest hem. Utter hush, save distant curryaps sharp as knife edges, harbinger of some forsaken farmstead hamlet, its dogs baying at phantoms. Vectoring the yowls through the murk, the village loomed, silhouettes of onion-domed huts and palisades whitewashed ghostly, a church's cross askew like a gibbet. Cautious creep to lead huts on all fours, void of life, no soldiery's tramp or the clink of canteens, save the winds moan through eaves. Midst the cluster, an elder, bearded as a mystic, caftan frayed to tatters, door ward in the gloom. Russian soldier's grandfather? Negation with a toothless shake. Germans? Affirmative, yes, yes. Hut ward jab with a trembling finger, eyes gleaming with peasant cunning. Rapture unbound. 3 raps on worm-eaten planks yielded our regimental captain. Haggard as Lazarus, doom accepted in his vigil with a half-reed Gerda. Now beaming wolfish at kin flesh, not the expected enemies with their bayonets and lists. Distrust the flies. Draconian reprisals loomed under Stalin's Order 227. Villages raised for a crust to Fritz. They'd tattle at dawn to the nearest Soviet political officer, who couldn't lurk far in the web of informants. We ghosted to southwest fringe. Sentries posted in pairs with strict no-talk. Balanced burrowed twin huts, sloughing sopping greatcoats and breeches heavy as lead, drying o'er behemoth stoves. Embers crackling birch logs that spat resinous sparks. Geriatric Russian pair, old woman and old man. Faces seemed like old leather. Sat impassive at the trestle, muttering prayers or curses, oblivious to the intrusion, save occasional glances from rheumy eyes. Revelation amid the steam. Our quilted winter rig, wadding of synthetic cotton, a Nazi ingenuity, near impervious to the deluge. My kit bone-dry bar jackboots that squelched like sponges. Abrupt as a grenade's pine. D-sentries urgent engines from the village, northeast. Patrol dispatched on the run. Returned breathless with divisional messenger. A lieutenant in a scarred staff car, goggles fogged, mutual jubilation erupting in backslaps, and shared cigarettes from a dented tin of gold crone. The lightning, face alight with improbable mirth. General patrolled motorized and dismount since noon with reconnaissance detachments, questing shards of the 198th like hounds on a scent. The division now a mosaic of battle groups totaling 3,000 effectives. 12 marches, Wehrmacht report, blared from crackling radios and bunkers. Him, the 34th Hunter, 4th Mountain, and our 198th Württemberg Baden as holding firm. A threnody for husks. Their banners, more ghost than grit. Morrow, Staff report in a commandeered manner, unitless as a plucked chicken. I devolved to orderly, div commanding officers, factotum in the Provisional Corps Group von Horn. A shell game where titles rang hollow as burnt casings. Punch nil amid the 8th Army's dissolution. Lulls? Foes refit intermissions, realigning echelons, hauling heavies on rail from the Urals, tuning tanks' engines clogged with step grit. Our sole reprieve from the remorseless grind. Commandless von Horn, a Berliner with a fencer's poise, vectored me utility in the maelstrom. First, forward command post with a half-dozen messengers. The main echelon south shifted to a ravine-sheltered chateau. Diurnal vista over the steppes safe from ambuscade save the odd biplane buzz. Vespers amber light. Horizon crawled reds, hordes of the 52nd Army in column. Horse cavalry sabers glinting like ice picks. Cossack squadrons lashing mounts forward. Bearing hell for leather at 20 kilometers per hour. Wire ward frenzy. Unplug lines. Retrograde now. Divisions command posts apprised in staccato bursts. 2nd Parachute Hunters Headquarters. Ramk's redoubt, the paratroopers' ghost from Crete. Bellowed over the field phone. Halt and fight, Captain. Engage the horde. My demurral feudal, voice rising over the static, lone with phones and lads armed with pistols, impossible. Reds lap us. You fight, I too, damn it. His African scars, no shield against folly. Enemies lapped west in a turning movement, peril acute as a noose. I severed the circuit with a curse, bolted rearward in the staff car. Ramk's echo nil, his later Brest-Litovsk sinecure in summer 40, for bespeaking a rethink of fanaticism famed for the Führer's ear. Regrouped at Corps Group's nucleus, a requisition chateau amid frost-laced orchards, maps pinned with bayonets, to justify the bolt. Reds too intimate, Sir General. Advance velocity of 25 kilometers daily threatens you. Town's end spies their vanguard already. White caps cresting their eyes. Hasty van and convoy, dust devil swirling. My moot suggestion for a machine gun nest at the threshold dismissed with a wave. Next, Uman'ka pontoonier overlord, Savern Pervame span. A 200-meter lash-up of Bailey trusses jury-rigged by 79th Engineer Battalion. Traffic czar and demo arbiter in the retreat's choked arteries. Military police, chain hounds in gleaming gorgets and steel helmets, pistols holstered like judges' gavels, police the flow, vetted laissez-passers with the zeal of taxmen barking quick at laggards. Prioritize combatants inbound. 40 France's norm, alacrity born of panic's whip, retreats? A field marshal's remit, not some captains. Superiors balked deference in their staff cars, harangued by colonels red-faced. Staff with briefcases of ire. Even a lieutenant general thundering court-martial threats from his staff cars rumble. Military police? Earless as sphinxes, school for stone-faced resolve. They're no Sir Colonel, bridge command trumps. A mantra that schooled me in Brass's bluster. Apex peril. Timed explosions poetry. Last friend off the planks. First foe's boot on M. Plungers plunge the line twixt salvation and sack. Rare ballet in the chaos. Remagen's major in charge of reserve shell. Ludendorff's fuse fizzle 45 under Yank arty spite. Bridge intact for Patton's dash. Shot on Führer's Wim Sand's intercessor. A ghost of our calculus. Sleepless vigil. Diurnal bridge watch from a knoll. I line to engineer plungerman. Electric squib primed in a canvas foxhole. Sweat beating despite the freeze. Nocturne. North bank ear to the void's whispers. Listening posts forward with listening cups. Stragglers or red scouts unheralded in the dark. Two's toll. Listeners heralded concentric creep. 52nd Army's flankers. Clearance barked, then bang. Mid-spans drifted languid on the current. Abutments beached askew. From a small hillock, we spied enemies riverside. Figures black against the moon silver. Probing with torches. Corps command post. Picket thin screen of dismounted hunters. Strays north bank? Lingering qualm haunts like a scar. Did some sergeant linger, cursing the tide? Russia's swan song billet. Town major in secretariat or akin, sprawl imperial, where squares yawned vast as parade grounds, a few square kilometers more or less swallowed by the steppes' indifference. Vespertine ingress to a stout edifice of yellow brick, pre-revolution relic with cornices chipped by shrapnel. Crammed lances, wounded festering on straw pallets. Gangrene sweet rot thick as fog, unattended save a lone medic with empty vials. Horror struck me mute, bile rising. Vowed succor in a croak. Radio war dash to a van with trailing whip antenna. Army link? Affirm from the ether, flashed urgent. Heavy wounded secretariat. 50 souls critical. Land evac untenable in mud air lift. Reply crackled. Yes, dawn. Mark strip with panels. Proximate the afflicted. Command post return. Teary Russian woman. Germanic ethnic German of Baltic stock. Blonde braids frayed. Ditched by a convoy fleeing east. Imploring passage with folded hands. Tears carving tracks in dust. Dawn's pall. Sodden lay for strip. Meadow quagmired by melt. Doubts gnawed like rats. Transport's undercarriage no match for the slop. But hopefuls ringed it on stretchers. Eyes fever bright. Transport Aunt Jew droned low. Fingers crossed in silent pact. Bog 10 centimeters on touchdown. Props thrashing mud geysers. Crew aghast in leather flying jackets. Pilot, sergeant, cherubic under his scarred helmet. Empty takeoff iffy from this morass, Sir Captain. But we freighted dire cases. Morphine days forms lashed aboard. We pledged collective shove at runway's end. One grin through the cockpit blister. Climax electric, Meadows M, lurch aloft in a stall heartbeat. Then soar, heavy clumps of clay shedding like confetti to the mud. The drone fading east toward Odessa's fields. Command post, woman redux quaking. Consoled with arm, round shoulders frail as birds. General ingress, greatcoat swirling. Routine, Sir General, not amiss. Smirk veiled the miracle. Cargo plane query pierced. Tail spun, wounded trove unearthed eve prior. Unaided transport evac orchestrated. Odd dawned. God, a miracle in this hell. Aerial mercy amid the rout. To me too, Providence's wink in the apocalypse. Romanian rimward retrograde. Debility fell from saddle mid-column. 41 degrees Celsius pyrexia raging like Stalingrad's. 106 degrees Fahrenheit delirium blurring the world to fever dreams of home. Hospital train whisked me Prut crossing. 41's ingress redux under sunny banners. Now April 44's gray exile. 3 winters gauntlet. 900 days of deprivation from the bug to the Dnieper. Vain for 198th's gallants, who'd bled for inches, turned kilometers lost. Train sway to Galats nursed me, Romania's Danube port. Mists veiling coal barges and the minarets of Ottoman ghosts, rekindling the old troop lust. Fever breaking to leave me hollow, but hungry for the line. Galats tarmac. Transport lift to Bacau. 8th Army's roost in a Baroque villa. April 44's bloom mocking the war. Saddle to sleeper in slop and sleet. Kit nil, but the uniform's rags and felt jackboots leaden as anchors. Romanian springs balm of lilac and dust mocked my tramp amid perfumed officers. 8th Headquarters. Sentry shock. Sergeant's eyes bulging, barred the portal of marble and gilt. Lobby demigods beyond French doors. Commanding officer's secret. Operations officer sanctum, chief orderly's lair. Crisp stripes red as blood. Polish gleaming like bayonets. Self-abash in the mirror's lie. Chainhound pitted at last. Sighted 198th's ghost in Roman shadow. Prompt van from Army Pool, an Opel Blitz groaning south. Mid-April, Roman ward, 60 kilometers Prut west. Führer's fortress phantasm. Bunkers to stem the tide. Rejoin the husk, fortification overseer. Bunkers of concrete laced with rebar. Wire mandrels uncoiling like serpents. Antonescu Pact, no Jews harm under the Iron Guard shadow. Yet thousands dragooned, locals from Yashi and Kishinev, coerced by truncheons, 2-hour noontide siesta mandated. Homeward meals of cornmeal mush and sour soup. Liaison Romanian, plains troops yeoman, husbandmen sturdy in putty-wrapped legs, but brass urban dandies, francophile fops from Bucharest salons, front shy as debutantes. Staffs rearward by 20 kilometers? Wire ample my colonel, French telephones. Dines at DIV command post. Multi-course bacchanals, cabbage rolls steaming, plum brandy flowing, hours of toasts. Ranks? Potage of haricots hulking, 1-pot cornmeal mush ladled from cauldrons. German commanding officers queued kitchens. Tradition from Frederick's Day, fork last. May 11th, 8th Army shed like a snakeskin. General of Infantry Otto Wohler, avuncular with a monocle and Crimean tan. farewell paternal in a rose garden. 84 telephony with a 90-year nonagenarian. Hermit in Grossberg-Seed's thatch, voice frail, but fire undimmed. Rebirth decreed. Bohemia Moravia camp near Prague, leave granted, rarest plum. Sopot Sanatorium. Childhood Riviera of white sands and spa house waltzes. Elegant Sopot, now a haven for hollow-cheeked eagles. Idol of Baltic breezes and weak tea. End. Dresden Replacement Depot, shocks thunderbolt. Riviera, not protectorate's beer halls. Sergeant reconfirmed thrice, transport lagged. Division nebulous in transit fog. Linger Dresden unscarred gem of Baroque spires. Open city under faint chandeliers, Semper Opera's velvet. Wagner's kin to Vienna's court theater. People's Opera's froth of Lehar for hospital's ghosts. 8 moons hence. RAF's Holocaust on February 13, 45. 25,000 souls in Pyre's Maw, a Dresden of ash. Russia sloughed like a fever, what Meo's 41 presaged gut deep amid the reed beds. Lost cause, the Eastern Army's doom sealed in overreach. Post-war palavers swirled like smoke. Lieutenant General Karl Wagner, ex-Army Group South Operations Officer, monocled Prussian. Indicted Führer Order 45. July 23, 42's hubris post-Kharkov's laurel. Ballooning Eastern Front 4,000 kilometers from Arctic fjords to Caucasus peaks. Thrust to Baku's oil sands winter's mend. Reserves raw from 41's million grave. High Command's haste. Geo prizes as gospel pre-victory's grace. Manstein's thunder. Stalingrad Fulcrum 42, 6th Army's north flank bared to Allies' soft underbelly. Hungarian, Italian, Romanian divisions of 200,000 rifles, but brittle will. Lured Ivan's scalpel, intelligence's edge. 6th Army's doom in the 300,000-strong cauldron. Paulus's white flag a ghost. Romanians? Allies' apex in steel and grit. Yet field hell Montenescu's due. The leader, scarred veteran of 17, proffered command with saber drawn. 42 South Fall map. Peril Patton Sands Baden, gamble cosmic. The Dons bend a roulette wheel. Front swine verdict. High Command insensate post-Kursk, comb through supply for shirkers. Hold out. Amnesia total. Blitzkriegs, blade dull to bludgeon. Conundrum gnaws. Why savants like Guderian yielded not to High Command/Hitler, their maps pleading maneuver o'er madness? True nadir. Russian roulette's croupier. The General Staff's silence our sepulcher. Paris pit stop en route. Near pristine under occupation's patina. Seine's bridges thrumming with Wehrmacht boots. Invasions roar a distant thunder in Normandy's bocage. Rhone train south. Sardine tin. Gauls fleeing north with satchels stuffed heirlooms. Whispers of Falaise's cauldron. Narbonne rendezvous. Staff billet in a vineyard manor. Dr. Meyer and moi. Major April 1st, 44. Battalions reaffirmed in parchment pomp. German Cross gold mine for Russia 44's Tikhonovka blaze. A Knight's Cross aspirant's nod. Pinnacle. Unknowing last rung. 34 senior private recall. Old sweat brevet. 5's even in dice or doom. Non-commissioned officer course. 3 Moons Forge. 500 raw youths. 5th grad. Company crown amid bayonet drills and map marches. Earwing unimpressed. Saul Paul vertigo from recruit to lance. Ambition's taint in his eye. Return. Irwin's homily in the barracks. Ambition scorn laced with envy. No plaudit reserved for favorites alone, but grades shield from his lash. Evasion thrice. Instruct next cohorts 500. Escape his gaze. Reprise shock. Irwin Crony's platoon. Listener post suspected. Whispers to the old man. Squad lead. Nurture or neuter under intimate's wing. Infantry shibboleth etched deep. War's frolic while it lasts. Peace's scourge eternal. With trials and tribunals. Thus, Riviera's languor in azure haze, Canet sands, Perpignan's promenades, till Riviera's thunderclap, 15 August dawn. We Eastern Rikers from Königsberg's snow to Breslau's spires, brooded fate's lash, letters from home scented with foreboding. 20 August cataclysm, 90 red divisions, 1.2 million rifles from the 2nd and 3rd Ukrainian fronts, plus 40 tank brigades, 1,000 medium tanks, forded the Prut in a steel tide, swamping Romania's oil fields and Carpathian passes. 24th, Bucharest quits Reich in coup's blood. 25th, war declared. Antonescu's head on pike. Cataclysm's reaper. 6th/8th Armies, post-Stalingrad 6th effaced anew, 8th halved in the Yashi Pocket, 16 divisions ghosts totaling 200,000, 80,000 missing in action eternal in the Steppes Maw or Dnieper's drownings. Providence's jest sardonic. Our Romanian whisk spared the 198th, Luftwaffe's last gasp ferrying us west. 198th. Pyrenees-Rhone literal sprawl, Regiment South, tow at Spain's neutral Sierra. Meyer ensconced, Chateau Valmy near Perpignan, Pyrenees' majesty of snowcaps and eagle Aries framing the vine terrace slopes. Mine, Red House, Perpignan Canet road flank, modest moss with bougainvillea, and a well that tasted of iron. Southern wall hype from propaganda scribes, O profession curiosity snorted. Wall? Phi, on the postcard. Predecessor's legacy, primitive bunkers, tow-light 75mm shells spite from a Corvette, bricks plastered stucco farce, sand's softer embrace. Organization tote Perpignan, phantoms in white helmets surveying with theodolites, sole yield. Come scribes Port Bougeant, neutral Spain's border enclave, where Anglo/Yank spies rubbed elbows at Tapas bars. Field gray faded as kin. Spaniards comped all with Rioja and ham. Peseta spared in phalangist courtesy. Cousin Barcelona consul? Trip elongated to gaudiest whimsy. Portbou, spies salon par excellence. Belligerents chummy over absinthe. Whispers of enigma cribs. Youth collars me at candle table. Companion Gestapo marked for espionage, blonde locks a beacon. Balderdash, braggadocio's puff. Eve returned to France, not hasted by shadows. Cousin absentia, stats swapped in a notebook. Silence ensued like a drop cipher. O profession flayed local Gestapo. Senior storm leader quailing under Himmler's chum's ire. Last confessed. Suitor spurned in Perpignan's cafés. Mystery dissolved to farce. Rebuild umpteenth. Cadres from the Reich's depleted pool, iron scant. Drills desultory in olive groves. Maneuvers mock with wooden dummies. Pleasance waned to senseless ritual. The wall a sieve. June's portent. Lieutenant General Otto Richter, doubt's harbinger. His engineer roots no bomb for the fray. Retrospect on 198th commanding officers. A gallery of eagles clipped. Von Horn, pre-war Paris/Bern attaché, noble lineage, ennobled mid-19th for Prussian service. Grandsire East Prussia's senior president, iron-fisted in reform. Sire general of the old school. Aunt Doris weds Mackensen, the Hussar of Tannenberg. To us. Colonel and General Staff prompt Major General. Authority innate as breathing. Salon poise with distance polite as a fencing riposte. No firebrand charging sand submachine gun vanguard, but migraine mute in council. Fealty organic, from lieutenant to infantryman. Antecedents. Troop Eagles true. Lieutenant General Otto Rodig, pre-war Lüneburg Regiment commanding officer, parade ground martinet. Till 10 April 42's Eastern Front baptism. Successor. Lieutenant General Albert Buck, Swabian Bull, pre-war Ulm Battalion on Danube's Bend. Killed in action September 6th. 42 with Operations Officer Bull in a dive bomber's shadow near Voronezh. Then, Lieutenant General Ludwig Muller, shadowy interim. Till von Horn, February 7th, 43. Muller alien, my convalescent France idol spared his rod. Richter. 48th Engineer Breslau Scion, June 3rd, 44 Commanding Officer, August 29th Yankbag at Rhones Ford. Inferior Scion. Personnel's dregs in 44's quota vacuum. Hundreds of slots, pool drained to dregs. Exhibit Narbonne. Self-funded soiree in Officers' Club, velvet drapes, crystal clinking, toast marathon ad nauseum. Gentlemen regiment commanders, prosit, et al. Hour plus of interruption. No colloquy amid the 150 dispersed souls, name scarce as rations. Lean ramrod relishing his oratory. Irked guests rose sour. Toasts returned through gritted teeth. Form uber functions folly. War's scant mercy for mummery. 44 Summers Paul, Eastern Front frays to tatters. Normandy breakouts, Cobra devours the West Wall's dream. 20 July's quake rends a veil. 1242 Rassenberg. Blast Wren situation in Wolf's Lair's map-room. For innocent slain in shrapnel's whim. Hitler unscratched bars, singed trousers. Maimings galore, Keitel's monocle shattered. Ripples post-war, the courts of reckoning. Eve's Call. Oberfession's fury crackles. Kleek's craven stab at the throne. Stauffenberg's sole name spat like venom. Born 07 Jettingen. Cavalry Regiment 17 Bamberg. Ardent Hitlerite of the 33 Putsch vintage. Piers Fink/Kerntheum Fellow Zealots. From War Academy. Tunis Mine 43. Orblost, arm/hand ravaged to phantom. Retained by Führer's grace. 43 Lieutenant Colonel in Tunisia's dust. 44 Colonel at 37. Reserve Army Chief of Staff Berlin. Meteoric arc from writing master to conspirator. Ida Oberfession, that fateful night. Satisfactory career, scarce motive in peak. Doubt profession, spur alone. Ire volcanic. Summon post-haste. National Socialist sacrosanct. Blood orders barbs, nil jest. Decent core, reproof verbal, no delation to the Gestapo's maw. For weeks, Riviera's azure reprieve, August 15th. Alert sirens wail, Luftwaffe 4-engine planes spot armadas, hull down silhouette. Dawn 15th. Allies beach between Toulon and Kennan Operation Dragoon, U.S. 3rd and 45th Infantry Divisions splashing ashore under naval thunder, our southern wall crumbling like chalk.